Bob Fleming here. Right, well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 167 of Retro Power and Cut. And we're going to start with Jensen, but not by the Jensen. We're going to start by this rear end assembly, which is a Heights independent rear suspension setup from that company in the USA. And it is what the previous folks working on the Jensen had fitted. And it has a number of very good features which are ideal for that car, but several features which are far from ideal for that car, which we're dealing with. We got that removed. I think that was actually, this assembly was actually removed from the car last week. But that's just a brace which I've put out of the way. I've just started work on a bit of re-engineering on this, and at the moment that's just evaluating what components I can use for various things. And the first sort of significant part of that is that these bushings, which mount the frame to the car, I mentioned last week, are not big enough. And so we're re-engineering that so that they are bigger. However, there's a couple of complications to doing that. And I'm actually pretty much set now on changing the orientation of these to a vertical pin type bushing, and probably based on a Nissan, the type used on the Nissan S14, R32, R33, R34, Skyline, two-wheel drive Skylines, etc. Various Nissans basically. They seem to fit within the envelope, the space envelope that we've got without doing too much modification to the body shell. Fortunately, the previous work done on the car has put an enormous amount of strength into the area where these are going to be mounted. So that's fairly easily done, fairly easily dealt with. The only issue is I'm just trying to minimise the amount of putting around, minimise the cost to the customer of the modification work. But yeah, we're going to change those to a different type of bushing in a different orientation, refabricate the ends of this beam to allow for that. And then we're going to refabricate this area down here. I call it a moustache bar. I can't think of a better description, but basically we'll put a tube, ignore all this bracketry, recut a new one of these plates, get rid of this silly brace, and we'll put a tube across here with a brace as part of it. It just won't be a separate little bit like that, which will then come up to two more bushes roughly here and here, which tie into the back of the main chassis tubes on the Jensen. So they'll have two mounting bushes there, two mounting bushes there, and then there'll be a diagonal brace from the ends of this tube here. There'll be a diagonal brace going up to the outer ends of this tube to prevent them flexing under acceleration load, to prevent them flexing like that. Originally, the Heights design has quite a long spindly tube which does look a bit flexy there. It does also have two radius arms from the actual arms here, which we will also use. But due to the fact that they articulate, obviously as the suspension moves, these cannot be rigidly bushed. And we don't want to rose joint everything because of the noise transmission factor. So you know, there's a limit to how much control those bushes can exert when they have to articulate through the angles they must articulate through. So we really want to brace the frame to the shell pretty thoroughly as well, whilst keeping enough compliance that we don't have too much vibration and harshness imparted into the vehicle from the diff, which I believe is a Ford 9-inch. Certainly nothing wrong with that, perfectly good for the application, we just need to make sure that it's all braced into the car in such a way that it's solid, you know, solid under acceleration and deceleration load, but not so solid that we transmit lots of noise and it's horrible to drive. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned before, these upper arms, the inner mounting of these upper arms is going to be cut off and redone to take a bushed end there, so we'll keep a spherical bearing at the outer end but a bush at the inner end, again just to reduce the MVH transmitted by that. These are bushed at the outer end and the inner end already. I'm going to try and find, these are quite a hard rubber at the moment, I'm going to try and find a polyurethane alternative for these, which is a little bit softer Sure rating, just to get a bit more compliance in the arms. But that's actually not such a bad design really, because there's rubber at both ends now, albeit only probably 1/8 of an inch thick wall thickness on the bushings. It probably is enough as long as the subframe is bushed flexibly enough to the shell. So that's the plan of attack at the minute. As I say, I've been working on these mountings for the ends of this beam this morning, just trying to fathom exactly what bushing is going to fit in the space, have the sufficient rigidity but also sufficient flexibility, and be available in a sensible compound, because a lot of the aftermarket bushings are aimed at sort of people, you know, drift cars and stuff where harshness is of no issue at all, and I mean, people, you know, fit the subframes with aluminium blocks and whatever, which is fine if you don't care about noise, but on a road car and a GT car, absolutely no use at all. So yeah, this is sort of the background to the work going on there. That's where I'm at on that. Nothing really to see, just planning and design and theory going on in the background. But moving on from that, we'll wander over here to the main part of the Interceptor, which Stu is currently working on. Now we have, I think he's actually, yeah, he's got it sort of loosely nestling in the footwell at the moment. But we've got I don't know if Cal's mentioned it before, I don't think he has. We're using the new Vintage Air Generation 5 HVAC unit, Magnum Generation 5 HVAC unit in this. And I was just looking at that this morning with Stu, and what an improvement on the previous ones. Vintage Air have addressed nearly all of the deficiencies that we had found in the previous units. They've made some design changes that are just tremendous. It's now an injection moulded casing rather than a blow moulded or vacuum formed, I'm not sure which casing. And it has nice flat surfaces in all the right places to enable mounting sensibly. The mountings are really nice mountings for it now. The inlet and outlet ducts are all separate pieces which are clipped on with clipped on with rubber seals rather than being glued on vacuum forms that we have to cut back off again to alter the vents. So on this we can simply unclip the original outlet vents, 3D print our new outlet vents, and they'll just clip. And then just clip them on in place of the originals, so we can redirect all the air, which we always need to do with these units. We can never really use the original outlet ducts, but we can redirect all the air now just by unclipping the originals, 3D print some new ones, clip the new ones on, done. So it's brilliant. The main fan is a SPAL unit, which I can see is going to be, I mean, this is a loose term, really powerful. It's a loose term, but it is going to be a massive power increase over the fan on the previous Gen 4 units. The slight complication on that is previously we've modified the older type fans to feed from one side because they were a single impeller. They were a centrifugal squirrel cage type fan, but a single impeller one with the motor on one end, and they were fed with air from both ends, but the impeller was a single core impeller. This one is split and it's fed from both sides, so we need to feed from both sides. So it's brought a slight complication to the air intake ductwork, but again, a 3D printer makes life a lot easier on that, so we'll be printing some nylon ductwork to feed that. Stu's continuing with what we mentioned last week with the bulkhead modifications and the footwell modification to allow that unit to go in. He's completed the reinforcement of the bulkhead with some box section, basically, because the reinforcement in the original bulkhead was 1 3/4 box section, so that's what's gone back in, but a section that sort of bridges over where the HVAC unit's fitted now, just to give us the space without too much detriment to the strength in that area. So that's Stu's getting on with that, progressing with that pretty nicely now. He's just been making up a little clearance piece that he's not used yet, but it won't be used yet. But it's a little clearance piece for the inner wheel arch for once the fan gets fitted. We need a little bit more. We won't need all of this. It's only quite a small blister on the inner wheel arch, but there'll need to be a bit of a blister just to clear part of the fan housing. So he'd started on that earlier, and then he's just working on sort of spacer in the fan to the right position, and a load of detail bits and bobs involved in just making the whole lot fit in the space available. And the other bit Stu's done, which I'm just looking at in the other corner of the engine bay there, is fitting the HVAC, and it's the ductwork, which we haven't done yet, that will feed it, has necessitated moving the wiper motor. And we decided the wiper motor is very, very easy to move when you're using the Lucas rack and pinion system. It's very easy to move. So Stu's moved that over to the other side, and then the bracketry that it was mounted on originally was a bit agricultural, to say the least. So Stu's made some new bracketry to mount that looks a lot neater than the original, and it's mounted now over on the driver's side, out of the way where we don't need to put something else in a neat little spot. So that's coming on very nicely. So to say, really, basically we're addressing the theory behind the jobs we're doing. So somebody that's watching this video thinking, why are they messing around with that and that? The theory here is there are certain bits that have to be as they are. There's not really another way around it. And the major bits there are the suspension, which has to be right, has to do its job, and pretty much sets the position of various things in the car. You know, it's pretty key. You build the car around certain components, the suspension being one of them. And actually, experience has shown, and daft as it's going to sound, I think most OEMs would agree on this, the other bit you have to pretty much build the car around is the HVAC unit, because you need it, a customer wants it, and it takes up a large amount of space in the car. And as you'll have seen, probably, I think Cal will have mentioned it on the Etype, the CAD work that's going on the Etype, we're almost having to design a quite convoluted HVAC system just to work within the confines of the car that we're working in, whereas here we're working with an HVAC system and altering the car around it, which is actually kind of the better way to do it. You're really better to design your vehicle around key lumps, and despite it appearing quite big, I think I've mentioned this before, there's actually a lot of functions built into that little box that Stu's got there, and it's actually now Vintage Air have revised it to this. It's an injection moulded box now. It's much better. These stepper motors look a vast improvement on the old ones. The AC core is a vast improvement. It's got this new thermostat control valve on the AC core is vastly improved on the previous one. Much neater, much nicer to mount, looks much more professional. The way that the pipe works routed, much neater. The fan, much better. And as I say, the inlet and outlet covers, these are the, try and show them now. The inlet and outlets vents go onto these apertures now. They used to be glued on. Now they sit in these apertures, and simply they just have some clips that go onto these sides here, and it means that we can just 3D print a vent and clip it on. So much better. And just all the mountings are now. Previously we've CAD modelled the mounts, and then the next one you get, because it's vacuum formed and there's a little bit of variation to them, the next one you get, the mounts are in slightly different places, so the CAD model doesn't fit, so we have to have slotted holes everywhere, and it's just been a bit of a pain really, whereas this looks like, you know, I think the mounting points will be in the same place every time because it's an injection moulded part. So yeah, thumbs up to Vintage Air, we're impressed. Good news on that one. Then there's the Redux project, which I'll dart this way around the welders. Not going to, as usual, we're not going to go into great detail on this because that's really for Mr. Redux to talk about rather than us. We just give a brief flavour of what's going on each week, so it doesn't seem like a big hole in the workshop. But the brief flavour this week is preparation of doors to receive carbon door skins. Sam's been working on that. There's various detailed jobs around the doors, but the principle is removing the steel skins, doing a few modifications to various parts of the door to prepare them for their carbon outers, and then the final prep on the body shell before it gets its blast and zinc metal spray. And the major part of that is, as you can see around various places on the shell, is the seam brazing. We use, I've mentioned it before, we use a Sifsil copper 968 rod, which is a silicon bronze rod, and then we TIG deposit that on all of these structurally significant spot welded seams in the car. There are various areas where we haven't done that. The apertures, we in the past have used silicon bronze on those, but on the Redux cars we're re-spot welding the apertures. We found that on the BMWs the original flange corrosion prevention and preparation was good enough that we can still spot weld through them after the event. So we're re-spot weld reinforcing certain areas but with additional spot welds. But most of the car is sort of structurally reinforced by this silicon bronze deposit, TIG brazed silicon bronze along all the seams to reinforce it. So that's where we're at on Redux. Move on from there, we have a pair of Algros, and the progress on these is on a couple of fronts. Now we've got a seat in there which is sort of covering up part of what's been going on there, so I'm just going to move that for a minute to over there, like so. Bobby has been working on, in conjunction with the CAD guys a little bit upstairs, doing some scan work and various other things. Bobby's been working principally on the handbrake. In fact, I need to have a word with Luke because he's left all his blooming reflective dots in the car. But yeah, it's been working on the handbrake and the gear shift mechanism, getting the gear shift mounted up, which is relatively straightforward because it's a Honda gear shift mechanism and lever in a Honda with the engine and everything in the same place, so it's basically a case of bolting it in place. But the reason for doing that was the handbrake, although standard Honda, is not in the standard position. Because we've shortened the floor pan by 130 millimeters, it moves the handbrake closer to the gear lever. So there's been a bit of revision work going on there because we were hoping to keep all of the cable mechanism and the cable side of things completely standard. And I think Bobby's pretty much concluded that is possible, I think. So he's not here today, but yes, he's been working on the handbrake mountings. He's been working on the dashboard fitment in this car, the handbrake mountings in both cars and the gear shifts in both cars, trying to get them both to the same stages so that the CAD guys, particularly Luke, can get on with designing the new centre console area and finish the design work on the lower dash area, which is progressing pretty well, but they'll be finishing that. So that's pretty much, I think, where we're at on Allegros. There's sort of, as I say, it's quite detailed, nitty-gritty stuff. And plus, the work that Sam's doing at the moment, Sam's just working on making the rotisserie mounts, which is sort of part way through the front ones at the moment, which we have to do through the headlamp apertures on this because there's not really another way. We could either go through the lower air grille apertures or through the headlamp apertures, and I think the centre of gravity that we're going to be working on, I've told him, is about there, and to do that it's easier to come through the headlamp apertures really is the better way to do it. So that's what Sam's working on at the moment, getting the rotisserie mounts done. And that's pretty much where we're at on Allegros. And then we'll go for a quick scout around the body shop, which is dusty, needless to say, which is dusty. Progress being made on all fronts, really, on all around the car in here. There is a lot of filler work, basically, a lot of sanding, a lot of block sanding, a lot of skimming and re-skimming, and nitpicking defects, and sorting out high and low areas, and just all of the usual detail work that goes into the body prep of a car that's had all of its panels made from scratch, basically. And yeah, we've got a few areas that are battling. I think I mentioned last week the corners of the roof were battling us a little bit. The rear wheel arches are being fairly hard work, because again, the quarter panels, we ran into a problem at Metalwork where to have enough room for the wheel and be able to get the correct outer shape, the inner and outer panels are pretty much touching around this area, and it really sets a limit on the shape of the car that area. And we had a bit of a fight with the metal in that area, and consequently the surface is not exactly bang on there, and so consequently the body prep in that above wheel arch area has been fairly challenging. But we're getting there. It's progressing pretty well. It's a long slog, as you'll know from previous videos. This stage is a long slog, and there may be the odd tense word at times, backwards and forwards, but we're progressing in the right direction. And yeah, Gaz is building his forearms up. Mark's building his forearms up, and we'll be he'll be tennis elbow all round within a couple of weeks' time. But yeah, let's say end of next week we're then off for a break for Christmas, so we'll get a brief respite from sanding for a little bit then before coming back to a wee bit more. But yeah, I think we're going to be the bulk of the way through the polyester work before Christmas. Then we'll be a bit more polyester and then into epoxy prime at some point. Hopefully not too long after Christmas, but we will see where we get to on that one. No promises forthcoming on that one, because any time we make a promise with that type of work is the first time we'll trip ourselves up. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at on that. And going back to the Redux car will not be too far away from also being into the body prep, because now the metalwork is getting towards its latter stages on that. Next stage we'll be bonding the carbon panels on, and then that's pretty much into the body prep then. I'm just going to come out of here for a moment, and I'm just going to have a quick glance on my phone, because I think there are a few questions. One off the top of my head that came up that I saw last week, somebody having a laugh at my lack of memory regarding the polyester, the spray polyester that we use on that Jag and every car we build basically. We, just a bit of background on that, we basically don't use a high build primer. We do actually, because the epoxy primer we use is high build, but we don't use what a lot of body shops would generally use as like an acrylic type high build primer. We don't use them at all. So our experience with them is pretty much whatever brand we use, it sinks. Whereas our sprayable polyester fillers don't seem to sink. The experience seems to have shown us that they don't sink. And the polyester that we use, I've remembered it this time, it is made by an Italian outfit called IVE that I believe are part of one of the big, I think they're part of PPG possibly, but it's made by IVE in Italy, and it is called Polycart 2850 Bianco is the material we use. It's Polycart 2850, made by IVE in Italy, and it's an extremely good high build polyester sprayable filler, and we pretty much exclusively use that for all of our build and surfacing work, and then we use our anti-corrosion epoxy. We use our anti-corrosion epoxy under it, and we use it again over it. Obviously the anti-corrosion properties are not very relevant going over it, but it is also quite high build and a very good sealer, so we use that again over it, and that's a Celimix product, which again I can't remember because the Celimix products are simply 4 digits and one decimal point in them, so I can't actually remember the number for that, but it's one of the 3 epoxy primers that Celimix make, and I can't remember which one it is now. But anyway, yeah, back to questions. There were a couple of relevant ones. One that was quite on point, I thought, actually, there's one from at TazNZ1. Have I thought about investing in a laser cleaning machine? Not really. What I've seen of them, I don't think they'd solve any of our problems completely. As is often the case with a lot of modern technology, the initial impact of it is you think, wow, yeah, wow, that'll solve all my problems. A bit like dipping of car body shells. You think, oh yeah, that's going to solve all of my problems. When you actually get into the detail of it, you found it doesn't solve all your problems. It solves some of them and not others, and isn't really a one thing fixes all and costs a lot of money. Now, actually, time and time again, we find other processes that claim to be as good, but actually old-fashioned blasting generally solves most of the problems the best way, we've found. It's just that finding the right blasting process is key, but we've got a fair few of those in our arsenal of ways to attack problems here, so that's not too bad. But the second half of your comment, which was that while I admire the skill and craftsmanship that goes into hand forming custom panels, I'd be interested in your thoughts on possibility of the application of incremental robot forming in conjunction with 3D scanning and CAD. Now, it's interesting you say that, because one of the most interesting technologies I think that will be coming to the classic car restoration sector is possibly incremental forming. Now, Nissan and Ford, I believe GM, and certainly Toyota, who actually put that, who used some incremental formed parts on their first GR cars, but various other companies as well, have all done bits of work with incremental forming. There are a number of techniques for incremental forming, as you probably know, having written that comment, and at the moment we're at the Betamax versus VHS stage of there's a lot of competition to see what system is going to be the best. And bear in mind that Ford were working on these systems in the 1990s. Nobody has yet really come up with the system. There's a machine which, again, you'll probably be aware of on the market called the Figure G15, which is an actual off-the-peg robo-forming machine, which is a single-point machine, and it uses a polyurethane mat, and it actually uses a single point and a polyurethane mat to do the forming. But obviously that can't do re-entrant shapes. You know, it can't. There's only certain shapes it can do. It basically has to have a drawer on every part, a drawer angle on every piece of forming that it does. So there are limitations on that machine. Now, interestingly, the Nissan system that Nissan used to make various obsolete parts where they have no press tools anymore for their in-house restoration programs in Japan, they use dual point forming with 2 robots, with 2 probes and 2 robots. Now, interestingly, that is the system that seems to be taking over as the system to use. But the software involved in the CAM part of the job of programming those robots is incredibly complicated. There's some very good videos on YouTube recently put up. Can't remember the channel that they're on, can't remember who put them up as usual, but there are some incredibly good videos about dual point incremental forming using 2 robot arms. And to that end, I very nearly actually got a robot for us to play with in the future the other week. For various reasons, it's not happening. Just timing, too many other things, not enough space, not enough electricity, lots of other complications. In an ideal world, I'd have had it. As it is, the practicalities are, I cannot. I'm fighting tooth and nail with myself not to have had it, but the reality is I'm not going to be able to use it in anywhere near the near future, so that's going somewhere else, which is slightly irritating, because it was a very appreciated opportunity that I was given for that, and unfortunately I've had to turn it down, which I'm very annoyed about, but there we go. So yeah, incremental forming is going to be very important to the classic car industry, and that's a very good point you make. However, for us at the moment, no, that's not going to happen. And then a couple of other things. I noticed somebody had commented about the Zinc sprayer saying your hands, wrists and forearms. Yes, it does kill your hands, wrists and forearms. I do it, and yes, my arms are hanging off. And the slight benefit, at least in winter, is you're also not completely frazzled by the temperatures, but in summer, I've tried explaining to people the level of dehydration you suffer doing that job. Anybody that does that day in, day out for their main income, my heart goes out to you, because it is pretty hard going. And I think that is probably enough. There's lots of other. I knew there was one other one. Here we go. Alan Money, 1582. How do you calculate the centre of gravity for the body twirler? I guess. I have a loose idea of roughly where the heavy bits of the car are, and think about there'll do. And normally that works fine. However, as another commenter, Richard Irving 4189, who I believe might be our very own Rich, who does our blasting, has wisely commented, saying that once the hollow sections in the lower part of the car are filled with blasting grit, the centre of gravity of the empty body shell becomes completely irrelevant, because you've probably loaded 150 kilos of blasting media into the bottom part of the car. So at that point, physical effort is needed to turn it over anyway, and any theory about the centre of gravity goes out the window. So yeah, I basically guess it. We get it pretty close normally, but the reality is we only really put the car on the rotisserie a little bit for some seam brazing and some finishing off work underneath, and for blasting. And as soon as you start blasting it, the centre of gravity moves massively anyway, so it's not that relevant. So that's how we do that. I'm afraid there's a disappointing lack of science in that one. On that note, I'm going to shut up and hand over to Cal. See you next week.
I'm going to have an extra.
Oh, really?
Extra espresso. Or Expresso, as many people say, much to my absolute dismay. Dismay. I wish I had a more descriptive word. You'd think people wouldn't say Expresso because it's quite clearly spelled ESP.
Yes, and we also have people who say Pacifically.
Pacific or Arctic instead of Arctic. That's
Arctic lorries.
Those Arctic lorries, yeah, I mean that one really does wind me up.
Articulate.
Yes, that's famously abbreviation of articulated. Right, thank you Nat. We'll stop poking fun at the misuse of English language and we'll walk this way and see what's going on. So, very brief pause on this. We're going to be back on with a variety of jobs on this. I think Anthony was just finishing off the breather pipe plumbing. Quite looking forward to getting this final piece in the engine bay, which is only really not ready to go in because I threw it on the floor a while ago and scratched the paint, but that kind of covers all of this central area up, so you only really see kind of the cam cover. Well, I say cam cover, of course the LS is actually a pushrod engine, so it is. I'm so used to correcting myself when I say rocker cover to mean cam cover. Of course, on an LS, it is actually a rocker cover. So, yes, it'd be nice when you can just see those covers through and that central piece in, which we are not far off, I think. Chin spoilers got to go on, which will be one of the next things. And I think we're getting close to being in a position to start the interior on that. And speaking of interior, hopefully we'll get some footage of this in a bit, but he's not here yet. But later today, Dean will be here to drop off the door cards and rear quarter cards for Project 1 and take away the next batch of panels which we've been getting ready. So there's various aluminium panels dotted around the place. I've been trial fitting them. So there's one that goes on the back of the fuel tank. There's the parcel shelf panel, the rear bulkhead, the rear floor, and the kick panels. And all of which we've basically scanned the car, drawn them in CAD from that scan, and then CNC plasmid them out of just thin aluminium in the case of these panels. They're all looking good, so just trial fitting them, make sure they fit nicely. Dean can take those away, they're all going to be wrapped in leather. And then there's a few other bits. I'm just trialling the console at the minute with the billet parts which have just arrived. So the big tray that your phone sits into, it's got the USB sockets, etc. in. Just trial fitting that in the centre console. A few other billet bits have arrived as well, actually, interior related. The little pins that go on the door lock to lock and unlock it from inside the car, they've been machined now, so they just need to go for anodising. And actually the rear lamp bezels, which, with the exception of the mirrors, I think is the very last of the billet parts. And talking about doors, actually, and the lock mechanism, George has been just doing a trial build-up of the whole handle lock mechanism and just trialling all the rods, because they're custom-made rods now, to link the later style latches with the earlier style handle that we've kind of engineered to have external central locking on. Just mocking all that up and making sure everything works well, which is looking good. So we're very close to being able to button up the doors. As soon as we've got all of that lot in for the final time, door cards should be here today. The speaker grills have already been anodised. It's just the surround part that those grills sit into, which Dean's taking today to be leathered. And then I think that's the last bit we need to complete the doors. He'll be dropping off the dash top for this car today, so we can get that in, get the vents fitted and fit the ducts, which are already there, onto the back of those vents. And then the only bit we're waiting for, I tell a lie about the only remaining billet being the mirrors. The instrument cluster is the other bit we're waiting for. And then we've disassembled the gauges now to send the bezels away to be anodised in the bronze accent colour that we're doing for this car. So yeah, it's kind of at that quite exciting stage where with this batch of interior parts will kind of just be put to one side for the minute while we wait for the remaining bits, but then suddenly all the interior will go together very quickly. We also had a batch of anodising back this week, which allowed us to finish a few things. So the fuel filler neck came back from anodising, so now that's allowed us to get that in and then button up the fuel vent piping, which is nice. And then if we sidle around to the front, you'll see the bonnet hinges are in, which I think they're already in, but we hadn't put the gas struts in, so they've now got their gas struts attached. And then we got the caps for these tanks back from anodising, and the same for the dry sump tank. So that's meant that we could get those together. I can't remember if we've done this last week, but we have actually bled the brakes and clutch on this now as well. I think we were just doing it last week. And then hopefully today, I can't promise we'll have footage of it in case there's a change to plan, but we should be getting the cam cover through today, which is in 2 pieces, and that then opens up the accent colour anodising batch, because the cam cover I'm going to do bronze anodised. We're then going to mask the ribs on it and the logo on it and paint it satin black, so that it'll have bronze details on a black backing, and that's the last bit we're waiting for in terms of the bronze accent colour anodising, and then we'll send that away with the instrument bezels, with the gear knob top, with the rear damper reservoir mounts and various other little detail parts, fuel cap, and all those bits will go away for the bronze anodising, and then that opens up a whole bunch more assembly bits. Steve and Alex have been pushing forward with the wiring harness, so they've had a 2-pronged attack. They've been doing the main chassis loom for this, which is already in place on this car, which I think's about done, and then they've been carrying on with the rear loom design, which is getting there. This one's almost there. They haven't started that one yet, but they're just doing the one for this car at the minute. It's a reasonably complex piece because it's also got all the wiring for the audio system in it. So you've got the amplifier's mounted at the back, just at the side. So you've got the power feed for that, which is reasonably straightforward because that's coming straight from the isolator, which is just over the other side of the wheel arch. But then you've got the speaker wiring from that. So one bunch of those wires comes down the sill, which is 4 channels because you've got the 2 mid-range speakers and the 2 tweeters at the front. And then one rear is right next to the amp, the other rear loops around to the back to the other side. So getting that lot in a suitable gauge of cable for the power of that amp, because although that Audison Forza amp is quite small, it's actually pretty powerful. So yeah, essentially getting all of that rear harness built up. As soon as that's done, that buttons up all of the rear section of the wiring loom and just leaves the 2 front legs, which are pretty basic, and then the engine harness, which will, as soon as we've got that cam cover here, we can crack on with that. We've been waiting for that because we've designed the cam cover to actually not only cover the wiring to the coil on plug units, but also act as a conduit to run the wiring that goes to the crank sensor and to the temperature sensor. So that will kind of be hidden inside the top cam cover and then come out down here. There's a nice smart way of hiding away that wiring. So we were waiting for that to finish the design of the engine wiring loom, but then we'll be able to crack on with that, which is good, and that basically buttons up 90% of what's in the engine bay. Another bit we got back from anodizing was the inlet manifolds. These were just like a bare machine finish. These came with the engine from Sherwood, but we thought we might as well anodise them, and if we were going to anodise them just to prevent corrosion, we might as well do it black, because that seems to be the theme on this car. And then you can also see we've got the bracket in place for the fly-by-wire throttle motor. Just been working on the bracket arrangement on the back here. Obviously at the moment there's a temporary sort of stud in here, but with a spacer, but that will be the flange on the engine, the intake flange, so that goes on the back of that. So yeah, that's going in place, and then yeah, well, further down the line, when we actually fire this up for the first time, we should be able to show you a bit of coverage of programming and doing the mapping work surrounding the fly-by-wire throttle on it. So yeah, that is about where we're at with that. This, we've had the same batches of parts back through, so the things like the caps on the tanks, dry sump tank, brake and fluid reservoir, etc. I've been working on some of the trim panels for this as well, so like the fuel tank cover panel we've made for this at the same time as the one for that. But at the moment I can't send away or start any of the interior work for this car because we're still waiting for some final colour choices on the interior, so I can't make any progress on the interior with it yet. Anthony's just been doing the door. We were waiting for the glass on this one. We had one set through quite a while ago, but I was still waiting for the second set of glass. So now that arrived the other day, Anthony's been able to crack on with getting the door builds together now, getting the quarter lights in there, the frames in there, doing all the drilling and mounting work for all of that. So that's going together pretty well. So yeah, we're in a good state of progress on these. If I have a meander over here, I'll show you actually a couple of things. This is the console I was talking about earlier. So these are going to be leathered. They'll be picked up by Dean in a bit, who's going to wrap these in leather. I've just been trial fitting the 3D printed prototypes for the components that go in them, and just trialing the billet parts as well to make sure there's no discrepancies. I want to give Dean the 3D printed pieces, you see, so that he doesn't have the risk of scratching the billet parts. But I wanted to try the billet parts, which I've done, and then I can provide him with the 3D print parts, so he's got a non-damageable piece to use when he's testing it, when he's leathering it all. And these are the little surrounds, which are just 3D printed, go around the front speaker grills on the Project One Escort. So these will be going for leather wrapping. The only bit you see is this band round here, and then the grill actually insets into that. So that's that. I think we showed this last week. Luke's just been making some of the cover panels, the blanking panels we've done to go over the ports, because we've decided we're going to bead blast the whole of the outside of this engine. So we're just blanking off all of the various orifices and ports. The open still on this side, he's going to make that blanking plate. In fact, I think he has, yeah, it's just down there. This one's on. And then the Etype. So actually the main bit on this is that Luke finished his designs for the aircon ducting vents and has been 3D printing them. I think one of them's printed, another one's probably in print at the minute. they're massive prints, even by sort of the speed of the Bamboo Labs printer we've got now. So we've probably mentioned before, we've got two printers. One does, I think, 450 by 450 by 450, but it's reasonably slow. And then we recently got a Bamboo Labs X1 Carbon, which does, I think, 240 by 240 by 240, but it's insanely fast. But these ducts, although they just fit in that area, they pretty much take up the entire print area, so they're still a reasonably long print. So that's what he's in the process of doing at the minute. And James has been working on the tensioner arrangement for the alternator belt. So we switched. We were originally thinking of doing it down the side here, but actually when it came to it, the top, where we'd made the bracket for the top of the alternator, that actually provided us with a more suitable platform to mount a tensioner than on this side, because down this side we were quite a long way away from any sturdy mounting points. So we're doing the tensioner on the top, so he's kind of midway on progress on that at the minute. And then I've been buttoning up things on the XJC, so everything came together at the last minute. I got the panel that goes around the radio anodized, sent it to Bruce, he did the engraving on it, sent it straight back, incredible turnaround, so thank you for Bruce Holder on that. And then Andy, Concept 303, machined me the control knobs, they're machined from black acetal. He's done an amazing job on those, so they're such a good finish, they're literally perfect straight on there, just fit and forget. So that all works nicely. So that's ready to go now. And then the main other areas of progress to mention are all up in the design layer. So Luke has now taken over. The guys you probably saw last week, the guys have kind of switched roles. So George was doing a lot of surfacing work on the rear end, body shaping on the E-Type, the other E-Type this is. He's now handed over the interior detail work to Luke, whilst George has picked up on the Audi Quattro project we've just started. So Luke's working on a lot of the interior, that centre console, basically taking it from the sort of initial rough out to filling in all the details, creating it in a fashion that we can actually make it. We've now decided we're putting the switch packs for the Alpine audio nav system on each side of that console, because they just fit really neatly with the shape that we had in mind there. We're going to put a little recess at the front above the Motec screen, which sits lower down, for a bank of switches. We've been playing with the instrument bezels and how they're going to work, and whether they're better sort of sat out a bit or individually recessed back, or we toyed with doing a sort of larger recess that both gauges sat into, either square or oval. So we tried a few ideas on that. I think personally I'm happier with the two recessed well back idea, although I've got to run these past the client, so we've literally just finished doing that today. So yeah, we're sort of pressing on with that interior design work. The bit he's about to start now is one of the more engineering-y bits, which is the upper screen, so the Alpine nav screen. We're going to have that so it can either be just a plain bit of dash fascia or have the Alpine screen there. And we were thinking about having it so the Alpine screen was there and the piece of dash came down in front of it to hide it. But actually, looking at the mechanism, it's going to be no harder, possibly easier, to make it so that both the fascia piece and the screen are on the same component, and it rotates to show you one or the other, a bit like those Bentley screens, which have three sides. You've probably seen on some of the newer Bentleys. But yeah, it'll essentially be a sort of triangular quadrant that has the screen on one face of it and then the dash fascia on the other, and depending on what mode you're in, it'll rotate to show one or the other. So we've sort of roughed out verbally how we're going to go about it, and then Luke's taken over now and starting to model how that will all work, how we're going to mount the actuators for that, etc. So that's looking really cool. And then George is working on the Quattro, so he's actually made really good progress on the sort of gist of the bodywork. We saw last week we'd kind of roughed out what size wheels we were going to use, how they were going to be positioned. He's roughed out the arch shapes now, happy with how that's coming together, and then he's working on the front end shaping, and we've started work on the lights. So we're going to do sort of matrix, pixel matrix headlights almost, or they'll probably be in reality side marker lights, but there'll be a defining feature visually, and the indicators as well. So we're kind of working out how that's going to look at the minute and kind of modelling roughly the shapes, and then again, same process, we'll sort of initially get it visual, and then look at making that into an actual manufacturable part and how that's all going to mount, etc. later. But at the moment, we're just trying to get the proportions, the scale, the position of everything right, so we can be happy with all of that. So yeah, that's an exciting project that's taking shape pretty quickly at the minute. And I think. Yes, there's Jamie's just quite rightly reminded me. As usual, when I don't have a visual cue, I struggle. But we did a trip over to KS Composites this week to look at the Algr progress. They are machining the tooling for the wings and quarters. So the way they're going about it on this occasion is that we did the CAD modelling of how we wanted the car to look. George then designed the exact shape of the wing, so he could provide them with literally a CAD file of a wing panel and a quarter panel. What they're then doing is they've taken that, they're then machining a male pattern of that shape, so literally the shape of the wing and the quarter panel from MDF. So they start with a massive block of MDF, put it in their absolutely enormous milling machine they have there, mill out the shape of the quarter and the wing, ×2, one for each side, and then when they're happy with that, they smooth that out, take a fiberglass mould from that, which is laid up extremely thick, so it's a really sturdy mould, and then the final carbon parts are laid up inside those fiberglass moulds. So it's basically creating an MDF male plug, taking a fiberglass female mould of it, and then making the final part in carbon inside that. So excited to see that progress as well. So I'm going to go back over there early next week. We were just sort of going over there to see the early progress on it and get a bit of video footage. I'm going to go back over there next week and see the final male parts in MDF, have a last visual check and make sure we're happy with them, which is one of the benefits of doing it that way, of creating the male first and then taking a mould from it. It does give you a last ditch point at which you can make some changes physically on that plug before you take the mould from it. Although I've seen some pictures and I think we're going to be happy with them. So yeah, we'll show you that next week. I think this is the penultimate episode before Christmas. So next week's episode will be a festive Christmas special. It probably won't be special. I'm hyping it up to be just a normal, something special, and it'll just be a normal episode. Anyway, we'll see you next week. Have a good weekend. Oh, nothing like a bit of waffle.
Buzz, come on. Buzz, come on.
Hello, Mara, what do you make?
Well done. Well done, man. I'm going to give you a treat as well because you've been good. No, Buzz, come here. Sensory overload. Buzz, come here. Good boy. Well done. Well done. Yeah. Sit. Good boy. Well done. Look over. Yeah. Sit. Let's to the sit now. Sit. Sit. So whenever the camera points at him, he doesn't know. He just goes stage fright. There we go. Good boy. Well done.